Welcome everyone to another episode of the Caspian Game Awards. Welcome to another very special edition of this series. Tonight, I know I said I was actually going to do this upcoming Friday, but I decided to actually get this out of the way tonight. Because admittedly it has been a hot while since I've actually done one of these, and I'm pretty sure I did say that I was going to do one of these yesterday, but I ended up not doing that. So I'm making up that time by doing it here. And, well, of course, as you can see, we are going to be talking about the year 2017 for this. And for anyone who is new to this series, I just as in like 10 minutes ago, I just made a playlist involving every single one of the previous episodes, so feel free to check that out. But like, if you want more context for all of this, we're pretty much going from 2023 all the way down, and we're basically giving our personal takes and our personal opinions, ours as in mine, about what should have gotten like certain awards and what have you. And of course, this is episode 6 or 7, I believe. So that's a lot. And also, I'm making sure that this time I'm actually going to be streaming at 1080p for you guys. I know I normally stream at either 720 or 900p, but I wanted to make sure you guys were able to see this in high definition video. So that'll be pretty awesome. Yeah, thank you. Before we get into this though, I actually do need to make an addendum of one of my previous episodes. So let me actually switch over to this before. Let me switch over to the face cam so that you. Oh shoot, that's right. But yeah, before we get into this, I do need to let you guys know that like I messed up on one of our particular things. So for our 2020 list, I actually gave that was the first category that we had, best game by new studio. So, pretty much, basically the best game by like a studio that came around at the time, right? That's essentially what it is. Well, I wanted to let you guys know that I messed up in hindsight, because these were the nominees that we gave for Best New Studio for 2020. Spoiler alert for those who are doing this, by the way. And I remember for this, I did have Hades on there. I will remove Hades from that, but there's actually good reason for that, and it relates to this particular, like tonight's episode. So, because admittedly, I kind of low-key forgot. And I didn't realize it was the same company, but we'll get to it when we get to it. So don't worry. That's the only addendum that I have as of right now. And keep in mind, I am thinking I'm probably going to do an entire episode basically going through every single change that I, in hindsight, would now make on what I've already decided to do. Because at the end of the day, like, I can own up to my mistakes and realize, yeah, that's not right. So I'm willing to grow as a person. That's the garage, by the way, if you hear it. But I am willing to grow as a person as far as my opinions are for this. So do keep that in mind. But yeah, like I said, for anyone who is new to this series, I started the series back in February, and we basically go through the Game Awards, their particular, awards, to see if both the winners as well as the nominees were actually, good. And if I personally wouldn't agree with it, then I pretty much added my personal takes. So, and yeah, that's kind of how this goes. And like I said, we're going into 2017, which 2017, I think, was a good year. Asterisk with that good. Because there were a lot of games that came out this year that honestly were really solid. Like, and you're about to see plenty of them here. Like, it wasn't like the past several years of games that we talked about, like 2018, where it was like, certain genres were just straight up terrible that year. or even obviously, 2021, 2022, where, because of the pandemic, we're just straight up, no game was good at, like, they were, like, I had to, like, do so much goddamn research on trying to make sure that everything was good. So, if I'm gonna be honest, this is probably the second best year that we're gonna be talking about thus far. I still think 2023 overall was a really good year for gaming. And then 2020 was pretty much the one that followed up on that. However, I think in hindsight, I think 2017 was a good year. I wouldn't say it was an amazing year, though, because there were some games that came out this year that just straight up set the tone for the past 7 years of gaming. And let's just say I am not a big fan of that at all. So, yeah, suffice to say, like, that's why I have the addendum, like the asterisk right next to saying 2017 was a good year. That being said, like, I would probably say, like I said, 2023 was still probably the best year, followed by this year, and then followed by that would be 2020. Just to kind of, and again, I'll probably do this at, like, once I do my update list or whatever. But yeah, that should pretty much set the tone for this year, is that it was a good year. It's like a B tier year, but it still had massive problems. We'll get to them once we get to the list, because I think the Game Awards was very reflective on just how iffy this year was in general. That being said, let's go over the categories. So, yeah, we've got, a lot of the typical ones. So, best indie game, we have best game by new studio again, so that'll be pretty nice. Best action adventure, best RPG, best shooter, and sim strategy, multiplayer, DLC expansion, remake, remaster, best art direction. You get the picture. So we're not having sports, racing, fighting, because admittedly there actually really wasn't that many that came out in 2017 that, like, I heard were particularly good. Even the racing games, because Forza Motorsport 7 and Gran Turismo Sports came out this same year. However, from what I can tell, there's some of the weaker games in their respective, franchises. And this was also the year for Need for Speed Payback, which I heard terrible things about. So I've not played any of those, by the way, just for context. So, like, I can't really. So yeah, even if I wanted to. Yeah. That being said, though, this year is actually also a pretty special year because, well, this wasn't exactly the first year I started on Twitch. That was in 2019. But 2017 was the year I actually started doing live streams. So you're going to start seeing a lot of games. Like, you're going to start seeing more games as we go through, further and further away from the present day. You're going to start seeing a lot of games that are familiar with the channel. Like, a lot of games that I've played personally or that I've talked about. So it's definitely kind of weird going through, as we go away from, 2024 further and further into the 2010s and eventually into the 2000s. Just keep that in the back of your guys' heads that, like, the older that these get, admittedly, the more biased I will become as far as, like, what games I'm going to present. So, and 2017, I think, is definitely sort of the beginning of that. So I'm presenting this now so that you guys aren't going to be like, oh, you're biased, you're doing this thing is rigged. I know. That's the point, man. Like, what are you, like, dumb? Okay, that was me. I'm so sorry. So, but yeah, great. Now people are gonna look at me and just be like, "What's his face from who played the Master from Doctor Who?" Being like,
"This is the face that didn't listen to a word you just said."
And to those people, you guys can go away. Anyways, if you get only like 5% of you will know that joke, but I don't care. It's funny. Wow, this is a really great start for By the way, we don't take these seriously, and we're gonna go over the stipulations just in a second for a refresher for everyone who isn't new. So these are our personal rules for this particular list, or for this particular thing. So rule number 1, cutoff date is January 1st and December 31st. Everything, it has to be a game that released within that year. It doesn't matter if it was released in North America a year later, that does not count. And let's just say there's actually a lot of games that were originally released in Europe or Japan that are going to be on the original lists that I'm not going to qualify for this because those weren't released in America in 2017. They were released in 2016 or even in some cases 2015. So they will not count because that's not fair to be America-centric. I'm not like that. So there's that. Rule number 2, it basically had to have been a game that had a decent to good launch, because let's just say that like the past 10 years of gaming have seen a massive increase of unfinished games being released, only for them to get fixed later down the line. I'm not going to tolerate that for the most part. There will be exceptions. As a matter of fact, I'm pretty sure I've already made one exception to that rule already. But as of this, we're not going to tolerate too much of that because I don't like rewarding bad business practices. So, no thank you. And then also, rule number 3, no early access games. They had to have had a full release this year, because there are a couple of games that did have early accesses in 2017, but did not release until several years later. In some cases, 5 years later, which is insane. And then as for, games that are the qualifications for Game of the Year, this is more of just a guideline rather than like, an exact rule. But generally, we're trying to aim for games that have like an 80% or higher score from websites like Metacritic to be accepted, because those are the more generally accepted games in general. So, and then they have to be completely new. So no remakes or remasters, because that's not fair for a game from 1997 that got remastered in 2017, 20 years later, to get Game of the Year. Like, that doesn't make any sense to me, because that's an old game that's just revitalized. So we're not. So yeah, that one's definitely a rule. The first point of that. That's the first point with the Metacritic thing. That's more of a guideline, but that second one is the most important one to me, because I've had this argument plenty of times with people who are like, "No, freaking, this game should be Game of the Year." It's like, that's an old game. Like, that's not fair. So, and then last but not least, of course, keep in mind that these are only games that I am personally interested in. So, if you don't see a game that you want to be on here, that is completely fine, because this is just all my personal opinion. You can disagree with me if you want. So, and we're not supposed to take this super seriously. I only take the seriousness part whenever I'm talking about, going in depth on everything. So, but anyways, let us begin, shall we? With the indie crowd. So, the indie crowd, again, keep in mind, I'm not as, in depth when it comes to like indie games in general. And admittedly, 2017 is kind of the biggest reflection of that, is that because keep in mind, I was still in high school around 2017, which that's really weird to think. But I wasn't anti-indie. I wasn't like that. But a lot of the indie games that were coming out didn't really pique my interest. Admittedly, that's still kind of the case. So, that being said, what did the Game Awards decide to choose as far as best indie games?
That was his mistake.
Okay, this isn't a terrible choosing of games. Let me just state that. Why the fuck is Hellblade Senua's Sacrifice on this? It's not an indie game. Like, it's not an indie game. Okay, so remember back in 2023 with that Game Awards where, you know, people were getting pissed about the fact that, like, the Game Awards nominated Dave the Diver as an indie game, even though it's not an indie game? Well, they did the same shit back in 2017 with Hellblade. Now, I know there's going to be some people who are going to argue, they are an indie game, though, but technically, because they self-publish their own games. Okay, but like that, by that definition, Valve is an indie company. Which makes no damn sense at all. Well, and also, here's the other thing. Like, the developer, I think they're called Ninja Theory, right? You know what else they made? Fucking Devil May Cry 2013. So, like, fucking, yeah, they're not an indie game. This is not an indie game by definition, because, and keep in mind, they've also been around for like a good decade prior. They also made like, I think it's called Heavenly Gate or Heavenly Sword. Yeah, Heavenly Sword back in 2007. Which, granted, that's not a good game, but, like, that was a first-party, that was a second-party exclusive for the PlayStation 3. Like, which means that, like, you know, Sony published their games. So, basically, what I'm trying to say is that this is an absolute no. It doesn't even count as an indie game. It's not an indie game. It's just not. Like, because again, an indie game has to be, it basically has to be made by either one person or like a small group of people who, you know, kind of do their own thing without any sort of backing publisher. But guess what? Ninja Theory has had backing publishers multiple times. So by definition, they're a AA studio. They're not an indie studio at that point. So now, that being said, this isn't going to be the only time we'll talk about Hellblade, because this is a game that I actually do think is kind of cool. But it does not deserve to be on here at all. Now, that being said, games that do deserve to be on here would be What Remains of Edith Finch and Pyre. What Remains of Edith Finch is honestly a game that I've been kind of debating on whether or not I actually wanted to play for you guys. Because, I mean, it's a short game, so it would be something like Journey, where, you know, it would be like just a one-time stream that I would do. But this game has like such a cool way in which it tells its story, and it gets kind of depressing at points, but like it's still kind of cool, you know. And I mean, obviously I don't want to get into details. I already know what happens because I was spoiled by it, by the way. But if you want something that's kind of more introspective about just kind of your personal self, this is a good example of a game that does that. And then this is where the addendum that I had to make for Hades comes in. Pyre was made by Supergiant. So, like,
That was his mistake.
That was my mistake, because I remember seeing Pyre. I didn't realize that Hades was made by, like, Pyre and Hades was made by Supergiant. I genuinely didn't realize that. Because I remember watching, because this was, I think, the first, or at least one of the first Game Awards I do remember watching. And it just didn't ring a bell to me back then. So, but yeah, they got quite a bit of attention with this game. So, and rightfully so, because this game looks beautiful. And as far as RPGs goes, it's actually one of the more unique ones, because it's real-time battles, but they do it in a way that kind of plays more like, I guess kind of like a traditional, you know, action game, or not really traditional action game, but just kind of basically doing like the like the turn-based stuff in real time, it's hard to describe. I'll get to it later as a spoiler alert for some of the other nominees. But I think it's pretty cool. And then last but not least, oh boy, we've got Night in the Woods and we got Cuphead. So this is going to be very weird for a lot of people. And let's just say both Saimori and Goldie are going to cry whenever I say this. I respect Cuphead because that game took 7 years to make. That is, to me, that is insane. Granted, part of the reason why it took that long is because they hand drew everything in the game, which blows my mind. So, like, in that aspect, I respect the hell out of this game. I just never really vibed with, like, the theming of the game, though. I know, I'm sorry. It's just that rubber hose 1930s animation style I have just always never really cared about, like, at all. I know that's ironic because some of my favorite media was heavily inspired by this era, but, like, the direct linking of that era, like, that era of animation, like basically just being directly tied to that, it's just not my thing. Not to mention, this game is hard as balls, so you will never see me stream this game, ever. Like, Jesus Christ, this game, like, no thank you. I don't have the patience to go through a game like this. And then, so yeah, like, in that aspect, it's not a game that, like, I'm not nominating because I hate it. I don't hate Cuphead. I respect it for what it was able to achieve. It's just not my personal thing. Though I will give it an honorable mention. And then we got Night in the Woods. So Goldie is crying about me not liking Cuphead. Saimori is about to cry about the fact that I don't care about Night in the Woods either. I'm sorry. It's just... You guys notice a common pattern with a lot of the games I play, right? Like, a lot of them are first-person shooters or grand strategy games, or maybe sprinkling a little bit of action adventure and RPG scattered about, add a stealth game or two in there. I've always been more about just straight up action, like, media in general. Like, I've always been more about just, like, grand scale a lot of the time, but also some, like, smaller scale, but still just action adventure style of games, or even just straight up games about war and conflict. I never vibed with a lot of games that are a bit more interpersonal, but in the sense of, like, you're just living through life. That I never got the appeal. That's why I didn't nominate... Spoilers for future lists, by the way. That's why I didn't nominate a game like Omori, because it's just... that's just not my thing. Or, shit, Life is Strange 2. Or 1, even. Like... I just don't care. I'm not trying to sound mean when I say that, because I know that sounds very mean, but it's just... I never cared about, like, that type of stuff. If I wanted to, like, engage with that type of media, I would watch, like, I would watch a show for that. I just find trying to play a game that has those themes to be super boring. Like, I don't know how else to describe it. Like, I just, like...
Well, that's all right then.
Okay, thank you, Patrick Bateman. God, not Patrick Bateman. God damn it, I can't even think of his name. It's the guy from How I Met Your Mother. Whatever, you get the point. It's just not my thing. That being said, I'm weird in that I like The Sims, but that's only because it's like it's not like interpersonal directly, you know? That's just me. I'm gonna shut up before people start fucking, you know, giving me like very, very, very in-depth reasons as to why I'm wrong, but in actuality, you're wrong. Jokingly, I say that. But let's get over the nominees that I've chosen. So, what remains of Edith Finch and Pyre are nominees. But you notice how there is one game that is missing on this list. This is 2017. Like, why the fuck did Hellblade get nominated? And this particular game didn't. Oh, Cuphead won, by the way. Which, respectable. "2017 was the year of Hollow Knight." I can't. What? How? This game was like everywhere back in like 2017, and even going into like the late 2010s in general. This was one of the most popular indie games of that year, alongside Cuphead and Night in the Woods. It actually blows my mind. It actually does, like... Granted, I know I haven't played this game yet. So, though... I'm getting ahead of myself. But, like, you get the point. Is that, like... You see why I don't like the Game Awards? It's because they are so out of touch when it comes to what's popular. Like... I don't know. You may not necessarily agree with me about Night in the Woods and Cuphead, but you have to at least agree that it makes no goddamn sense why Hollow Knight was not nominated. Not even nominated. It was completely snubbed. Like, so yeah, we're giving this game a nod. Granted, is it the best Metroidvania I've ever played? No, because I still give that to Shantae. But it's still a really cool one. And then we have a game that, honestly, I didn't realize actually was fully released in 2017, but then I remembered, it actually was released as early access back in 2014, but it actually qualifies for this list. Darkwood. This is a very fucked up horror game. Granted, I don't play too many horror games, as you guys can clearly tell, but this is definitely a game that, if you are a huge fan of horror games and you're kind of iffy about, you know, the direction in which horror, especially around this time, like around this like year, was heading towards, this definitely satiates that, you know, desire that some people want out of modern horror games. Because it wasn't doing any of like the mascot horror shit that you've been seeing with, you know, a lot of the cringy games. And I'm just going to be frank, cringy games that came out around this time, like Hello Neighbor, fucking Baldi's Basics, or people are gonna get mad at me again when I say this, but frankly, Bendy and the fucking Ink Machine. Like, I'm sorry, but like all of those games were just were basically just following on the Five Nights at Freddy's craze. So like, suffice to say, a game like this, an indie horror game like this, was a breath of fresh air. Especially since, as someone who, yes, likes FNAF, if I want to play a fucking horror game, I want it to actually look like a horror game. So, Darkwood is getting the nod. But what actually wins? Well, the envelope will tell us. And the award for the best indie game of 2017 goes to Hollow Knight. Again, this game got snubbed. I don't know how you just completely forget the second most popular indie game of that year. So, granted, like I said, I haven't like streamed it yet. But once I get a new computer, I will guarantee you guys this will be another new playthrough that I am willing to do. But yeah, as far as like, reasonings, it should be pretty obvious. The Metroidvania familiarity, but unique challenge that this game offers, the unique atmosphere and just art direction in this game. Like, this game has a very, very, very distinct like style that you can tell is like has its influences, but is definitely its own thing that I think looks pretty damn cool. And this game is admittedly on the harder side, but it actually ends up being rewarding at the end of the day. So if you want a good Metroidvania, this is your go-to. And also, shout out to my friend Saimori. He's been playing through the entire game, so go check out his playthrough. Like, if it piques your interest, that'll be pretty cool. So yeah, that's the best indie game. So yeah, all right. Next up, we got the best game by a new studio. Now, in the context of the Game Awards, usually this means best indie game by a new studio, but I personally like to just kind of have it to where, it's just new studios in general. And typically they do choose like different games to represent this category. So what did they end up choosing for this? Well, let's see. There's Hollow Knight, which, fair, like I just talked about, absolutely valid. Cuphead, also again, even though it's not my thing, completely valid. And then we've got these two other games here, or these three, I should say. Mr. Shifty, Slime Rancher, and Golf Story. Slime Rancher is another example of a game where it's like, I don't particularly care for it. It's just not really my vibe. Yes, it's a first-person shooter, but I've mentioned this millions of times before. I prefer games that are a bit more realistic looking, with the exceptions, but the exceptions typically take themselves seriously. That's why Hollow Knight, I gave it the award, because yeah, it's a very cartoony looking game, but it takes itself extremely seriously. And a lot of the games that I end up liking that are human based are serious anyways. So I don't know, it's just I just don't know. It's just not really my thing. Same thing with Golf Story. Like, it just kind of looks kind of boring. Like, again, this is coming from the mentality of someone who didn't really care about the indie scene at the time to begin with. So yeah, keep that in mind. And then also Mr. Shifty. Admittedly, I didn't really do too much research on this game anyways, so maybe I'll end up actually kind of getting it for what people are talking about, but I don't know, it's just not really my thing. It should be no surprise, though, that Cuphead once again won, which, again, fair. Not really my thing, though. But what is my thing? Well, funny enough, 3 out of the 4 games we already just talked about, so I'm not going to repeat myself on those two. But also, a game that came out the same year, Little Nightmares. Which this is I guess they're a AA studio? I guess. Hold on, let me look up their games again. But yeah, this is I'm pretty sure we talked about the sequel back in 2020, like with the 2021 list. This is of course the original game. If you want a game that is kind of similar to something like Inside or Limbo, where it's like a platformer, but it has a very creepy like edge to it, then Little Nightmares is definitely your go-to for sure. And okay, yeah, it's by Tarsier Studios, who, yes, was originally known for making DLC for the Little Big Planet games, but as you can clearly tell, this was their first like major like non tie-in thing, therefore it counts for this list, because yeah, this is their first major game debut. So, but yeah, as far as a game like that, this game I think does it pretty well. So, but yeah, admittedly, I don't think I need to really much say anything else that I already didn't say about the previous three. So let's get into the winner. So here we go. Oh, here we go. Yeah, make sure it's in here. So the winner. Oh, so the award. Excuse me. No, it's the award goes to. That's how it goes. So the award for the best game by a new studio goes to Pyre. Which should not surprise anyone who has seen the 2020 list. So, again, this is showcasing why Supergiant is pretty gigantic and making pretty good ideas. This game is freaking beautiful. Like, again, this is easily one of the most visually vibrant games that I've ever seen. And just how fluid it all looks, too. Like, it's insane. And there's a good reason why Hades looks as amazing as it does, as well as its like sequel, as we've seen with gameplay so far. Like, damn, like this is easily one of the best looking games I've seen, especially from this time frame. But also just the fact that like this game has a very unique take on how its RPG systems work. That's pretty cool. And as I've already mentioned, Supergiant went on to do amazing things. So with the power of hindsight, this is definitely the best choice. And as I've said, addendum for them being nominated in the 2020 list. This was their first big breakout game. I know that for a fact. I made sure to look up their previous games as well, and they didn't really gain as much attention. So yeah, this is for sure a solid win for them. So that's pretty cool. I don't think I need to pretty much say anything else. Like, I'm pretty sure most people would agree with this. So, because again, this award admittedly is more so for hindsight. So, but, you know, it is what it is. All right. Best action adventure game. Oh, boy. Okay. This is a bit of a weird one. Actually, this and the RPG ones, I'm just going to straight up say they fucked up both of the categories. Like, I'm not even trying to build it up to you guys. These are not very good categories. Like, the games that they chose should not have been the games that they nominated. A couple of exceptions, and I'll get to them. But yeah, this was a weird one for sure. And, well, also, frankly, a very
It's not good.
It's really bad. So let's I'm just gonna show it to you guys. So I think you guys already see the problem here. Two of these games are RPGs, and one of them barely counts as just a straight up action adventure. So, okay. Like I already said, we're going to start seeing more games that I've played recently. So, and of course, I need to address the Horizon Zero Dawn. So, I remember I tried streaming this game back in 2021, late 2021. No, yeah, September and December. Because I was in the mindset of, oh, this is just another typical action-adventure game. Which is probably what these freaking people thought too. But no, this is a full-fledged RPG. So, by that alone, it shouldn't even be in this category. It should be in the RPG category. Because it's an RPG. It's not an action-adventure game. So, why is it here? There's that. And then there's the other aspect, which is the basically I don't care about this game right now mentality. Because if you guys remember when I tried streaming that, I hated the fact that this was one of those games where it's a pretty big, it's a pretty big map, keep in mind. Like, this is, I'd say it's around, the same size as, what's a good, size comparison? I'd say it's around, the same size as, something like, I want to say something like Oblivion. If you took both Oblivion and Skyrim, that's the size of the map. But here's the thing. They force you to build your fucking fast travels. I'm sorry, but that's a huge L in my book, because especially when you can see that there's 2 other open world games on here that have way better fast travel. Holy shit. I'm sorry, but that alone already brings that down. That might sound like that's a bit of a nitpick, but once you actually go through the game and try to scavenge as much as you can, it starts to really show just how bloated this game's world unfortunately can be, which sucks because I actually think the concept is really damn cool. Basically, tribal communities living amongst, robotic animals. That is such a cool concept. It's just a damn shame that had to kind of ruin it for me. And also the terrible cutscenes. This game has dog shit cutscenes. I'm just gonna be straight up. The game looks very its cutscenes look very dull. Even on PlayStation 5. And I'd imagine it's the same case on PC. So yeah, coupled that with the fact that admittedly Aloy's not a very interesting character, you see my problems with this game. So it sucks because it's just damn, this game has a cool concept, but no, they had to ruin it. And they're also thinking of remaking this game, even though this game came out 7 years ago. That might seem like a bit of a time gap for some people, but it's really not that long ago as far as gaming history is concerned. I don't know why they're remaking this game. I don't even like this game. This game sucks. Why are we talking about it? Let's move on to the other game that's an RPG on here that should not be on this list. Assassin's Creed Origins. Again, it is understandable why they probably mistaken this for being an action-adventure, because Assassin's Creed was traditionally an action-adventure game similar in style to something like Sly Cooper, basically mixed with, funny enough, Zelda. So it's understandable why they would have thought that it would have been qualified, but no, this game is straight up by definition a role-playing game. You level up Bayek on, where you get better loot over time, and you have tons of stats, and there's tons of different side activities. And keep in mind, I don't actually hate that. As a matter of fact, the last 2 games that the last 2 Assassin's Creed games that we've talked about, I brought them up as guilty pleasures, Valhalla and Odyssey. That being said, I would argue that Assassin's Creed Origins is actually a genuinely good game. It sucks though, because this was admittedly the last good game that Ubisoft made up until Prince of Persia Lost Crown, but that's a story for another day. But yeah, this was admittedly kind of the last genuinely good game that they released, and that's honestly pretty sad, because this game was the needed overhaul of Assassin's Creed that was kind of necessary for the franchise. because Assassin's Creed was admittedly getting pretty stale, and having basically just completely overhauling the gameplay was refreshing to say the least. And I'll even argue this game has some like amazing content in it. Most people know about this already, but like that Anubis boss fight, that's got to be one of the best boss fights of like all time. Like that was like fucking awesome to do. Like, so as far as like an Assassin's Creed, granted, the problem that a lot of people have with this game is that you aren't really like, because it's an RPG. Well, that nearly means you can't really play stealthily. But here's the thing. There's still a lot of sections in this game where you do have to actually stealth through, and they still keep to their guns with it being, at its core, an Assassin's Creed game. Unlike Odyssey and Valhalla, where you can pretty much play those whatever you want, Origin still makes you play this game like a stealth game, but centered around an RPG system. And that is why I'm kind of spoiling about the fact that this is probably going to be on the RPG nominees, but that's why I would argue that this is actually an unironically good game. So go check it out if you are curious. And also, it's set in ancient Egypt. I'm a sucker when it comes to like just that sort of region of the world, especially a setting that actually doesn't have a lot of like games directly tied to it, which it's really weird. You would think that like Egypt would have a few more games, and there's a couple of games I can think of that are set in Egypt, but like they don't have their whole game centered around Egypt. So yeah, that's kind of weird. And then, last but not least, Uncharted Lost Legacy. It barely qualifies, but honestly, I'd rather consider it to be a third-person shooter. So, yeah. And then, of course, you guys can clearly see I am just completely, ignoring Breath of the Wild and Super Mario Odyssey. That is not intentional, I do apologize. Legend of Zelda, Breath of the Wild. Good game. I would argue that the only thing about this game that sucks is the weapon degradation. The weapon degradation is stupid in this game. It doesn't necessarily break the game as much as the fast travel not being a thing in Horizon Zero Dawn. But that is a noticeable problem with this game, is that weapon degradation can be pretty dumb at points, especially at key moments in the game I shall not name. Yep. But regardless, though, it is still a quality title with, amazing exploration, really cool dungeons and boss fights, and, very creative ways for you to get new items. Like, that's pretty cool. And I do respect the game for doing that. So go check it out for sure. And also, this was a launch title for the Switch as well. So bonus points for being a launch title to really kick it out of the park. So good job. Last but not least, we got Super Mario Odyssey, which admittedly, this one's kind of an iffy one. Keep in mind, also around this time, I used to be very anti-Mario. I was in my very anti-Nintendo phase. I'm not super anti-Nintendo anymore, but I still really don't like modern Nintendo, especially with what they're doing with certain games that I love. Honestly, fuck you, Nintendo, for doing that shit. But I don't know. Admittedly, with by the time that Super Mario Odyssey came around, and admittedly a part of me feels this way too, is that there's not really a lot of innovation going on with Mario at this point anymore. There's only so many things you can make a 3D platformer do to stand out. And to be fair, the idea of being able to control like pretty much anyone, that's pretty cool. But like outside of that, it's really not that different from any other Mario game, which I know would make people then argue, okay, well then, if it ain't broke, then why try to fix it? It's not necessarily what I'm asking. I guess I'm just kind of asking, like, why are we still considering Mario games to be like the best games of all time when like they've been kind of been the same? That's what I don't get. So I do respect Mario for for basically saving video games as a whole back in the 80s, because remember, mid 80s was not a good time for gaming in general, and with the release of the NES and Super Mario Brothers 1 in particular, it basically just kind of was like, hey, this is what the standard for games should be, at least for the next like 5 years. Go with it. So, and also even a lot of the other games that eventually came out, I do respect. Just don't like say this is a 9 or a 10 out of 10 game. That's all I'm asking, please, because it's not. Like, there's a certain point where you have to be like a bit realistic and be like, yeah, this is not the best Mario game. It still can be cool though, and I'm not shitting on this game for being bad. I'm not saying this is a bad game at all. As a matter of fact, spoiler alert, I'm pretty sure I put this as a nominee, but just reel back the expectation, like reel back like, the hype. That's all I ask. That's partially why I, back in the day, didn't care for Mario in the first place. It's because of just that overhypeness that people did. That being said, yes, it should not surprise you that Breath of the Wild won. This was on a lot of people's top 10 lists, a lot of people's favorite game of the year, so that's not surprising. And like I said, Breath of the Wild and Super Mario Odyssey, they're here too. But Hollow Knight is as well. I'm not going to repeat myself on that. But also, considering that with this category, this isn't just covering action adventure games. We're also covering straight up action games, straight up adventure games, and also horror games in general. Granted, in this case, it's not a horror game. I've decided that because of those stipulations, I'm going to bring in For Honor into this. So, which I know, this is another game I remember streaming a lot. So keep in mind this is slightly biased, but I still think that this game is actually a lot of fun. I was even trying to make sure that I tested that out pretty much throughout this past week on my own time to see if this game was pretty much fun. I went back to it. It's still a lot of fun. Like, it's a very, very, very challenging game, and it is a game that has a steep learning curve, but if you just take your time to learn how the mechanics work, because for those who don't know, it's a pseudo fighting game. I don't like calling it a fighting game, but it's a pseudo hack and slash, I think is a better term for a game like this. And yeah, you basically have to, you play as like a typical pre-modern historical type of unit. So originally at launch there were knights, samurai, and Vikings. They've since added Roman legions, Chinese warriors, Egyptians, pirates even. So like they've added like a lot since. But yeah, those were kind of the first three that they introduced. And honestly, they were able to basically you basically have to block and parry and then find the best points of attack against your enemy. Like, it's a very distinct playstyle, and this might sound weird, and I know people are gonna fucking groan when I say this, but especially when you consider that like a lot of like Twitch streamers and YouTubers I've seen who play these games also love this game as well. It's really not that different from learning how to fight enemies in a game like Bloodborne or Dark Souls. Like, oh wait, that's not the wrong one. There we go. I know that's a cliche comparison for a bunch of games. As a matter of fact, people made that same comparison with Cuphead, which I don't agree with that comparison at all. I think this is a better comparison for this, more so on the basis of just, A, the difficulty, but more importantly, just being able to basically just try to master fighting against, like, you know, really good players, or even just the AI. So, because you can play this cooperatively, which, thank God, that's the case. But regardless of all that, though, I still think that as far as, like, you know, just straight up action games, this should at least get a nod. And then last but not least, we got Hellblade. Again, not an indie game, but it's a good enough game to qualify for this list. And it's a pretty cool story-driven, you know, game, sort of like, you know, pseudo-historical, pseudo-fantasy thing we got going over here. We got, like, you know, mythological creatures going on. And yeah, like, it's, again, I can't spoil it for you guys for who want to play it, but if you want, like, a game that's, like, has, like, a lot of, like, you know, old European, you know, folklore tied to its, like, narrative, check it out. But, of course, there can only be one winner. So, the award for the best action-adventure game of 2017 goes to Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. Another pretty obvious one, but still, nonetheless, one that is pretty deserved. Again, this is how you do an open world game. Not like what happened with Horizon, which is weird because, again, this is coming from someone who has a lot of Sony games and even has a Sly Cooper plushie. So it's weird that the one, like, you know, oh, you would be defending Sony here. Nintendo did an open world better in 2017. That's just facts. That's just facts. Like, go play the game yourself. Like, and hope you guys just don't, you know, annoy the hell out of me. But you get the point. Good game. Solid open world. Storyline finally actually tying in all the games into one nice timeline because of the fucked up timeline that they did. This is all good. And, of course, exploration is pretty cool. Go watch my playthrough with Saimori if you want more in-depth stuff involving this game. You get the point. But now, we get into the proper RPG list. And like I said, this was another portion that was straight up bad. So, but for different reasons. Let's go over that. Not just one. Not just two. But 3 of these games did not release in 2016 or 2017. 2 of them came out in 2016. And one of them is a remake from from a game from 2010. That should tell you, that should say it all. This year was a genuinely really good year for RPGs. Like, I would argue that, like, 2017 like I said, it was a genuinely really good year for RPGs in general. Okay, to be fair, I know Persona 5 had an American release in 2017, but it does not qualify for this because it was released in Japan a year prior. Therefore, it does not count. And Final Fantasy 16, again, is a game that came out in 2016 in North America as well. So, I don't know why it's being nominated here. And I think I've already mentioned... No, I do remember. I mentioned a couple years ago that, frankly, I don't particularly give a shit about Nier. Just 2B, just in general. I just don't care about as a character. I got some shit for that from some people, but frankly, here's my response to that. Stop jerking off to her. That was super blunt. But that's kind of the vibe I do get from people who say that, who defend Nier and specifically 2B. It's like, okay, you're literally defending it because it's some, chick that you think looks hot who's not really a human, who's like just a transhuman robot thing. I don't fucking know. It's granted, part of this bias is also coming from the fact that I'm not huge into anime anyways. Granted, there's a lot of Japanese games I do love, Silent Hills 1 and 2 being the pinnacle of that. But when it's something weird like this and even gets borderline fetishy, it's I don't want to bother. I have my interests. But it's no. So yeah, no thank you. And then, fucking South Park. Jesus Christ. I mean, pointing back over here, Hell of a Boss and 2017's Castlevania are the only two adult, animated shows that I actually genuinely like. Hazbin Hotel as well, although tied into that, but you get the point. Granted, this is a thing I've mentioned plenty of times before. I'm not going to repeat myself. I don't like shit that has this type of humor. I think it's extremely cringy. I think it just is extremely just... It's not even the fact that it's shocking that is just the thing that offends me. It's just the fact that it's trying so hard to basically shows like South Park or Family Guy or Modern Simpsons or anything like that. It just tries way too damn hard to be edgy and cool, but it ends up just coming across as cringy. And a game based off of that definitely is going to be a big no on my list. So the fact that the only game on this here that I think would qualify is Divinity Original Sin 2, which, by the way, they would end up making a game that I don't want to be bothered with because the owner of the IP of said game is a piece of shit. That's pretty sad. Especially with just a lot of the other RPGs that came out this year. Because Assassin's Creed Origins, hello. Pyre, hello. Okay, what did I end up nominating? By the way, Persona 5 won. Not surprising in the sense that Persona 5 won, but it's just it doesn't count. So this game is cheating, which just makes this even more depressing. So I decided, okay, that was a weird transition. Okay, there we go. I decided, because again, this was another good year for RPGs. Because it wasn't just Pyre and Assassin's Creed. Obviously, Divinity Original Sin was pretty excellent, I'd say. And this is proof that I don't hate Larian. They made a really damn good game back in 2017 and another amazing game in 2014. I don't hate Larian. I just hate how they made a game that they used an IP for where people literally, where the IP owners literally will send the Pinkertons to people's houses. Like, that's it. That's all it is. That's why I don't want to fucking play Baldur's Gate 3, by the way. Context for the 2023 thing if you want to know about that. But you get the point. Like, Larian is a phenomenal studio. And they made some of the best RPGs. So, don't you fucking tell me that I hate Larian in this fucking household. That is not the truth. And you know what else that I'm personally surprised about? Where the fuck is Neo? Like, you know, one of the first, like, non, From Software Soulsborne RPGs that, like, people thought was genuinely really damn good. Where the fuck was that? Like, freaking Game Awards? Like, what the hell? Again, it's so dumb that, like, they nominated 2 games from the year prior. And a game, granted, a remake of a old, like, it's a pseudo remake, whatever. But, like, they didn't nominate this. Big, massive L for the, thing. And then, honestly, this one was me admittedly kind of throwing a bone to this, Xenoblade Chronicles 2. I feel like I didn't really respect Xenoblade Chronicles 3 all that much. Although, to be fair, I heard that game wasn't as good as the first 2 Xenoblade Chronicles anyways. And granted, to be fair, this is another, like, this is another JRPG. But I do think that, like, out of the JRPGs that did actually come out in 2017, this was definitely the best one. At least in my opinion. So, yeah, as far as, like, that's concerned, I'll give it a nod. But of course, there can only be one winner, as always. So let us get with the award. And the award for the best RPG of 2017 goes to, and I noticed there's a bit of, like, a lag, but I do apologize for that. Divinity Original Sin 2. Never tell me that I hate Larian ever again. And don't ever say that I did not give them an award. Because they were worthy enough to gain it with this game. This is a worthy sequel of the first Original Sin released back in 2014. But they updated a few things. The deep combat being more akin to something like old school. Actually, okay, this game has, like, an interesting way in which it does combat, because it's kind of like old school Final Fantasy, where it is turn-based, but the systems that are in are very similar to that of a game like, Diablo or Warcraft. So, yeah, like, it has, like, some cool combat depth. And just the way in which it tells its story, and, like, a lot of the unique races and factions and the characters, all that is pretty cool. And since it has that sort of 90s-esque style to it, it is proof that you can still do an RPG like that in the modern era. Because admittedly, a lot of companies are kind of afraid to go outside of their comfort zone from, like, like Bethesda, which has basically been making the same fucking game for the past, like, almost 20 years now. Not entirely, but samey thing. Or, like, Final Fantasy kind of, doing its own thing. Divinity Original Sin 2 showed that you can still use older systems, and it can still work in a borderline AAA sense. And we got Original Sin 2 out of that. So, good job, Larian. you were a pretty good studio. You still are. It's just I wish you didn't make a game that was owned by where the IP was owned by a company who likes sending in Pinkertons. So, but anyways, now let's get into the shooter categories. So obviously, the shooter category isn't actually a thing at the Game Awards. This is something I decided to do, and I decided to actually be like, there's a couple of good games here. How about we talk about them? So, some people might be iffy on a few of my choices, but I'm going to explain why. So, obviously, Uncharted Lost Legacy was nominated for Best Action Adventure, but I'm going to nominate it for Best Shooter. Granted, I'm going to be frank, it is not as good as Uncharted 4, and it is not as good as some of the other Uncharted games. So, but sorry if you guys can hear the background, but you get the point. Is that like it is like it's still cool. It's still fine, you know. Like as far as third-person shooters are concerned, it was fine. So I'll give it a nod. And then, of course, we've got 2 games that I know for a fact are good for this. Resident Evil 7 and Prey. Resident Evil 7 was a necessary game for the Resident Evil IP because for the better half of 10 years, they have just been in a ditch of ideas. Basically starting with like the late 2000s Wii games and going into the mainline series with Resident Evil 5 and especially 6, they have really struggled to gain a lot of people's attention. In 2017, they were able to actually get their shit together back with Resident Evil 7. And truth be told, this is a really damn good game. Like, hell, this is a good enough game that I put it in my intro for horror games. Whenever I play a new horror game, it's in the intro. And yeah, because this game is extremely fucked up. It is honestly kind of sad in a lot of ways. And even just the unique threat, which is something that like was so desperately needed with Resident Evil, because Resident Evil was just stuck with the whole zombie thing or zombie-like enemies. Like they haven't done like something quite like this in quite some time, and to see them finally actually do some shit involving that is pretty cool. And granted, yeah, it is a survival horror game in its core, so it's kind of a shooter, but it's more of a survival horror. I'm gonna nominate it for shooter. It at least deserves a nod. So go check out Resident Evil 7. It's worth your time for sure. And then we have Sniper Elite 4. Oh, wait, not Sniper Elite 4. We'll talk about that in a little bit. We got Prey, which this one is a bit of an iffy one to talk about because when this game first came out, not a lot of people cared about it. Like, which is something that I do distinctly remember is, you know, people, granted, I know exactly where that mentality comes from. Because for those who don't know, back in 2006, there was another game that was released called Prey. And it was kind of cool. Like, it had some unique ideas. It's a story for another time, but, like, basically, like, you know, just put that in the back of your minds. There was a game back in 2006 called Prey, which had a completely different plotline, story, everything. And then there was supposed to be a sequel back in 2011 that ended up getting canned. And then the rights was bought off by Bethesda, I think around 2012, 2013-ish. And, well, radio silence until 2015, where this was announced. And, of course, this released 2 years later. So now putting that aside, this is an awesome experience, at least in my opinion. I think that as far as Bethesda games are concerned, which by the way, this is made by Arcane, the same developers who worked on Dishonored. Yeah, this is that should pretty much tell you everything if you played Dishonored. So, which now that I've reminded myself, yes, there was that other Dishonored game. Didn't really do as well as the first two. That's why I'm not nominating that game. Spoiler alert. But as far as like, you know, its own concept with some obvious influences from games like BioShock, I would definitely recommend it. It's really cool. So why the hell is Sniper Elite 4 in Tom Clancy's Ghost Recon Wildlands on here? It's because, to be quite frank, Sniper Elite 4 is arguably the best Sniper Elite game. Like, this game, also keep in mind about this year, 2017, this was the year of the return of the World War II shooter, or just World War II games in general, which some people will groan at that statement, being like, you know, I know you guys got burnt out on World War II shooters throughout the 2000s. Like, everyone was milking World War II shooters, or just World War II games throughout the 2000s, and it made people really not want to bother. But you're talking to someone who actually really loves World War II games, so it's like, it's pretty cool to, like, you know, see you know, a series like this come around, especially with like a series that basically it is a third-person shooter, light stealth game, like tactical shooter. It's kind of all over the place when it comes to its genre, but the one thing that it does well is simulate sniping, as well as, like, you know, you being able to see the kill, like the damages of all the kills. That is what this game does really damn well. And also the open-ended level design. You can pretty much approach any scenario in this as you wish, similar to the Hitman games of recent years. And that is why this game, I think, definitely deserves a huge nod. Because as far as, you know, this like type of tactical shooter is concerned, if you want to call it a tactical shooter, it's iffy on if you want to call it that. I'll just call it a traditional third-person shooter. There's a lot of cool things you can do in this game. So, and also, obviously not affecting the score, but the DLC for this game is pretty good. So, go check out SE4. SE4, you will not regret. And then last but not least, we've got Ghost Recon Wildlands, which I'd say this is probably the biggest head scratcher for people. If I'm going to be honest, this is honestly one of the better Ghost Recon games. Like, I did not nominate Ghost Recon Breakpoint because, frankly, that game was just kind of a shell of what it should have been. But Wildlands, I think, executed its concept pretty decently. Like, granted, I know of the issues that people have with this game, being some of the level, like some of the mission structures can get a bit repetitive, and also I think there was a bit of a controversy with certain portrayals of certain characters in this game, which in that case, I guess that is a bit of an issue. Granted, you know, I don't know, that part's always kind of touchy to do in general, because it's like, you know, no matter what, you might get people who are going to get pissed off with, you know, certain portrayals. That being said, and also, I'm just going to be frank about this. This is a war on drugs game. So, like, it has that kind of going against it. Like, it's a very anti-drug game. Not that I'm pro-drug, but it's very obvious with its message. That being said, though, putting all the controversies aside, I think that as a game, it does its concept really good, or at least as good as it can. As I know this is I know for sure that like this is more of a tactical shooter, so I'm more willing to call it that. But yeah, as far as like a as far as like trying to execute an open world tactical shooter is concerned, it honestly did the best that it could. Cause like there's tons of side activities you can do in this game that do relate to the mission at hand. Obviously taking down a drug cartel, and the amount of locales that are in this game is honestly very beautiful. Like, this game, honestly, whenever I first played this, and I have streamed this game multiple times on my old YouTube channel, and I think a couple times on Twitch, like, this is like still an amazing looking game. Like, and if there's some sort of a shader mod, or like some sort of a graphics overhaul mod that people make for this game, I can imagine that this game will look even more beautiful. And again, just the amount of weapons and the customization that's in this game, and even a lot of like the post-launch content that they made for this game. Honestly, it does make this, frankly, one of the coolest open world games. If you are more into military shooters, like I am, it's pretty cool. That being said, let's go over the winner. And the award for the best shooter game of 2017 goes to Prey. So this game is, I think, probably the best choice for this. Granted, I am a little bit biased with Ghost Recon Wildlands because, again, that's another game I streamed a lot. But putting my bias aside, that game does have a lot of flaws. This is the objective answer. It is a worthy reboot of like just sort of the name Prey, even if it has zilch to do with the original game. Like, just being its own, like, okay, it's obviously inspired by BioShock. That's like the main game that this is definitely inspired by. With even the earlier System Shock in some areas. But as far as like, that style of game, I actually think this is probably one of the cooler of that type. There's tons of exploration and just sort of the mysteries that kind of tie into what you've basically been involved with whatever the hell's going on here. I think that's pretty cool. And basically, like I said, it's basically just BioShock in space. But admittedly, I actually kind of like that theme a bit more, as opposed to like the 40s-ish look of the first few games, at least. And of course, Infinite went in a completely different direction, but that's a story for another day. But yeah, like, I think it's pretty cool. And just the amount of stuff that's in this game, like, you will not be able to see everything your first playthrough. I can guarantee it. So, if you want like another shooter that's kind of in the vein of like those, check out Prey. Oh boy, sim strategy. Another category that is consistently iffy with this particular channel here. Did they finally get it right this time? No, not fully at least. They got 2 nominees right, and they had the right idea for a third. But okay. Best options: Halo Wars 2 and Total War Warhammer 2. Again, I'm biased because I've streamed a lot of Warhammer 2 quite a bit. You guys are probably wondering, why haven't you streamed Warhammer 2 in quite some time? Because it's been like a couple of years. It's actually because of Warhammer 3. Because, admittedly, with the power of hindsight, Warhammer 3, I don't want to say necessarily nullified playing Warhammer 2, because like you can still, because like, you know, because of the updates that were made in Warhammer 3, like playing Warhammer 3 compared to Warhammer 2, it is different. And also if you have a shitty computer like mine who can only run Warhammer 1 and 2, but whatever. Like, yeah, there's kind of that factoring in. That being said, though, Warhammer 2 is a very important game, at least as far as Total War is concerned, because keep in mind, from Shogun 2 up until this game, the Total War IP was doing very not good. Like, it was, again, watch our tier list on just kind of that in general. But point is Rome 2's launch was a disaster. Attila had low sales expectations, and Warhammer 1 kind of blew up in their face as far as backlash. However, with the rise and creation of Warhammer 2, it actually allowed for them to actually get their shit together and make an objectively better game than the first Warhammer. I'm just gonna be honest. And, well, let's just say that this game has a bit of a personal bias for me anyways, because let's just say that this was the game that actually got me into Warhammer as a whole. So, as with a lot of other people, this was the first time I heard about Warhammer. Okay, not the first time I heard about Warhammer. I obviously knew about Warhammer a few years prior, and even just caring about the Total War game. But I wasn't initially interested because, well, I was only ever shown orcs, Empire, and then dwarves. And granted, I'm a fantasy guy, but it just seemed a bit too generic. Until I saw the Lizardmen and the Tomb Kings. Yeah, those two guys got me into Warhammer. And thank everything for that, because I mean, just look at that shelf of Age of Sigmar books right there. Goddamn, those are childhood books that I'm thinking of probably getting rid of at some point, for those who are wondering. But yeah, I have nothing but thanks for this game, but I'm showing my bias a little bit. But what about the other options here? Well, like I said, Halo Wars 2 actually is another really good option. It's better than the first one. It does have the issue of microtransactions, though, which is unfortunately a bit of a nod. Although, to be fair, that is just kind of the unfortunate reality of this era, especially because, well, a lot of multiplayer games were really hammering up the microtransactions. It's unfortunate. It's a sign of just capitalist greed, and it's stupid. But that's unfortunately kind of the world we lived in. And, well, still live in. So, yeah. Putting that aside, though, the expansions that they had for this game with new, with new sub-factions and just kind of fleshing out the gameplay that they established with the first Halo Wars was pretty cool. So, and also, I'm just going to straight up say it, this is the best game that has released in the Halo franchise, post Bungie. And it's not even made by 343. It's made by Creative Assembly, who also made Total War Warhammer 2. So that should pretty much tell you everything from there. Although, to be fair, this was actually their first full RTS game, which is interesting because they're more known for their grand strategy mixed with, real-time battles. So that's interesting to see there. And then the last one that I will respect, but I respectively disagree with, XCOM 2 War of the Chosen. This is a phenomenal expansion. Like, one of the best expansions, I'm going to be honest, of all time. It should not qualify for a list like this. Because that's kind of cheating. Because it's not XCOM 2. It is an expansion of the game. So, this is a fair pick for a DLC or expansion list, but not for this. And then we've got Tooth and Tail, which is an RTS game as well, but admittedly it just wasn't really a theme that I personally liked. I don't know, it's just a bit too... This is not really my vibe. And then we have fucking Mario Rabbids Kingdom Battle. Twice. Warhammer was snubbed twice by the fucking Rabbids. I don't even need to repeat that this is Hoodiitis. You know it's Hoodiitis right here. Hoodiitis. That's what this is. This is so stupid. I swear to God. I swear to God. This is so dumb. Like, why? I don't get the appeal. Why the fuck are Proto Minions more popular than literally the best, literally the best Total War game since Medieval 2? Jesus fucking Christ. Yeah. They did this twice. They didn't just snub Warhammer for the Rabbids 1, but twice. That's actually terrible. And that right there is proof. I think that right there is proof that, like, someone paid these fuckers to actually give this a nod. I don't care if, like, people like this game. This isn't the best strategy game to pick. Literally. Like, what the fuck, dude? So yeah, no, dumb, actually objectively the worst choice. I'm not gonna fucking hear from people. So you know what? We're gonna showcase the actual nominees. So obviously Halo Wars 2 and Warhammer 2 are going to be nominated here. But, well, let's go back to World War II quite a bit. So, where's Steel Division? Granted, I did have Steel Division 2 as like a guilty pleasure, but Steel Division Normandy 44 honestly was a bit of a breath of fresh air, which I feel like I've been saying that quite a bit, but in this case, in the sense of, you know, having a World War II, I get it's another game that's like, it's kind of like it's kind of like Total War, in that, like, it's actual ground battles. You actually spawn in your units first before you go into battle. You don't build up your troops up throughout the entire game. But yeah, as far as, like, you know, simulating the battles of World War II, Steel Division, I think, is really cool in that regard. So, and a very underrated game, I would even argue. And then, well, another World War II pick. Granted, admittedly, like, I didn't know what else to pick, because I like having a minimum of 4 options for each of the things that we talk about. We have Sudden Strike 4, the 4th in a long-running series of strategy World War II games. So, admittedly, I'm not as familiar with, like, the Sudden Strike series. This was just the one I remember the most, just seeing everywhere. It got decent coverage. It got okay reviews. And if it's something you're interested in, check it out. Like, I'm not going to pretend that, like, you know, it's better than anything. I just want to give it a nod. That being said, it should be pretty obvious what's going to win, so I'm just going to get this out of the way. The award for Best Sim Strategy Game goes to freaking Total War Warhammer 2. It's freaking obvious. Like, come on. I remember streaming this game a lot on Twitch. I just haven't in a while because, admittedly, again, Warhammer 3's out and you can literally play all the content in this game in that, so it just kind of feels weird. But this was a very important game for the Total War IP and Creative Assembly in general, because, again, they were kind of in an iffy spot at the time. This is what Warhammer 1 should have been, because, like I said, Warhammer 1 wasn't really all that good, if I'm going to be honest. And it didn't attract people like me because, yeah, it just straight up didn't look good. Plus, the whole freaking, you know, Day 1 DLC for the Warriors of Chaos really shot them in the foot on that. But, that being said, this game was basically, like I said, it was basically just Warhammer Plus. Not the subscription service, fuck that. It was basically Warhammer, like, 1, but with the quality of life improvements that it desperately needed. Because the issue with playing Warhammer 1 is that, like, basically it was just kind of shit to, like, control, and everyone pretty much felt the same regardless of what, like, race you were playing as. Like, it didn't matter if you were playing as, like, the vampire counts or the dwarves, they played the same. And the one faction that was different was the Warriors of Chaos, and, well, truth be told, they were the worst faction in the game. So, yeah, Warhammer 1 has unfortunately aged very poorly. Warhammer 2, on the other hand, had those improvements that were desperately needed, but also actually gave reason as to why you should play each of these factions, you know, on their own separate playthroughs. Because every single faction that's in Warhammer 2 plays extremely differently from one another. Like, High Elves don't play like Dark Elves, who don't play like Skaven, who do not play like Lizardmen. And, of course, with the DLCs, Tomb Kings and the Vampire Coasts don't play like each other either. So, actually giving reasoning as to why you should play these was pretty good. And just the purpose of actually having, like, a set goal for actually expanding outside of the map, outside of just, you know, having, you know, a certain amount of cities taken, was pretty cool as well. And the combat. Oh my god, the combat is so damn good in this game. You have no idea. Like, well, unless if you've seen my streams on this game in particular. Go check out this game. Especially, like, even if you're not a massive Warhammer fan, if you just want, like, a really fun, you know, turn-based strategy mixed with real-time battles, sort of like gameplay that's like a fantasy setting, this game might pique your interest. It definitely did for me, and, well, it got me into Warhammer, so I have nothing but huge thanks for this game. I know I'm showing my bias, but this game deserves it. Which then leads us into multiplayer, which, dear God, do I even need to say anything? The multiplayer selections have consistently been the absolute worst. Every goddamn year we have talked about this godforsaken, you know, ceremony show, award show, whatever. Like, it's actually embarrassing how bad they have chosen certain games over the years. And, well, it should not surprise you that this year is no different. And, well, unfortunately, this is also another year that we're gonna have to talk about a game that I went on a huge rant about last time we were on here, so I'll just say you the details once we talk about it. But as far as multiplayer games from 2017, this was their selection. Jesus Christ. Every freaking year they have the worst choices. I don't understand it. So let's get the obvious out of the way. Oh, okay, the second most obvious things out of the way. Mario Kart 8, respectable game, but it came out in 2014. This was a 2017 re-release for the Switch. It should not qualify. I don't know why it does. It shouldn't, though. So, again, it's a respectable game in its own right. Just please, Nintendo, don't be like that as far as this game's concerned. Like, or not. Okay, it's not. Okay, it's not Nintendo's fault that this is on here. This is the Game Awards' fault. I will blame Nintendo for making Splatoon, though. I think I've already mentioned in our 2022 thing with Splatoon 3, I don't care. I think the character designs look pretty dumb. The gameplay looks stupid, and honestly, again, it's one of those things where it's like, Splatoon is like a very, I feel like, you're only really interested in it if you are like a Nintendo person, you know? Like, it's not really a multiplayer shooter that's like, that has like a lot of like appeal, which that's not necessarily a problem. It just doesn't appeal to me. It also doesn't help that, like, again, let's just say I've had a few run-ins with certain people within the Splatoon community that, let's just say, we're not the kindest. Obviously, I'm not going to name names, and this is obviously not reflective of everyone who is a fan of Splatoon, but not for me. I'm not gonna go on my rant on Fortnite like I did before. Basically, all you need to know is that I hate this game with a fucking passion. It literally, basically butchered Epic's legacy as a studio who actually used to care about their original fans, but sold themselves out into making corporate schlock. And frankly, the fact that like I could not avoid this game back in 2018 pissed me off so fucking much, I almost actually fucking shot myself in the goddamn, like, head, metaphorically, because of it. I hate this game with a fucking passion. I've always hated it, and I still hate it to this day. Don't ever shove this game down my fucking throat ever again. And this goes by any of the people who I know who do like this game. Obviously, I'm not gonna shit on anyone who likes this game, but don't fucking say this is the best game of all time, otherwise I will cut you off. This game is literally the thing that I hate about the fucking world the most, as far as like the video game industry is concerned. It set a very bad precedent, and frankly, I can't stand this game because of it. And again, this game got nominated twice in a row. What were people like that? That right there just proves to me that this game, just straight up, was not only just like of its time, but overrated as shit, man. Like, again, this game was nominated for 2017 and 2018, despite the fact that it was already released by the time they did the Game Awards this year. So yeah, no, fuck this game. This game's a piece of shit. But yeah, I'm not gonna go on another fucking tirade on this game. I already fucking did last time. Go watch my 2018 video on it, because all you need to know is Epic basically became the most corporate piece of shit company ever because of this game, and I fucking hate them forever because of it. Anyways, next up, we got the other game that blew up this fucking year. PUBG, PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds, which, of course, with the power of hindsight, we all know that this has aged very poorly. Granted, it wasn't really that good of a game to begin with, and I don't hate this game as much as that piece of shit over there, but I still don't like what this game did, because this was the first, widely successful battle royale that wasn't Minecraft Hunger Games, and, well, the developers were basically a bit too ambitious with the game, and it pretty much resulted in a really not good game, if I'm just going to be straight up honest. Like, this game was broken at launch. You can't deny that, too. So, as far as I'm concerned, like, people have definitely turned around this game. Granted, this game broke Steam records fucking somehow. Like, it got, like, it broke the concurrent player counts faster than CSGO. I don't know how. But, yeah. Whatever, you get the point. This game aged poorly. Hold on. Yeah, this game aged poorly. This game's a piece of shit. And the game right next to it over to the left, Destiny 2, if Bungie was actually someone who was smart, I would probably have given this a bit of a pass. However, this is another game that unfortunately has aged poorly, because once they started removing the content from this game permanently, paid content, may I remind you, I stopped giving a shit, and frankly, I am very concerned about what they're going to do with Marathon because of the fact that they literally removed like the first 3 years worth of content in Destiny 2. And because of that, this is one of the few games that I know for a fact I'm never going to stream again. Because I don't want to support a company that will literally just straight up steal people's fucking like money several years down the line. Just because they say so. I know they use the excuse of like, oh, the content of the game is getting too big. Okay, then just make Destiny 3. All the content that you guys should have made from like the past couple of years, you should have just put that as Destiny 3. Or even Destiny 4 at this point. So, what can you do? Now, that being said, there's of course one more game on here, which, again, as a part of the same World War II craze going on at the time. COD World War II. Now, normally, I would agree with people about, going after this game, as far as it being not very good and all that fun stuff. But truth be told, granted, this is pretty obvious for people. Okay, no, it's pretty obvious for you if you guys have seen the channel. I actually do like COD World War II. I think this game is massively overhated. The campaign is not very good. I will definitely agree. But is literally what people asked for when it came to a Call of Duty game. Like, people wanted a game that went back to a more traditional, early style Call of Duty game. That's literally what this game is. Like, because this game is basically just, it's basically, if Call of Duty Black Ops 2 had like a World at War skin, and that's it. Like, that's literally what COD World War II is. Like, okay, maybe not exactly World at War, because this game is especially more focused on the Western Front of, World War II, like France, which I guess fair. That's the most common setting in games like this. And admittedly, that is a shame that they didn't go into the Pacific Front or even have like more Eastern European maps. It wouldn't be until the DLC where they started to actually kind of branch away from that setting. But at the same time, it's like, it's literally what people were asking for. So, and I'm just going to be honest. War mode, really fun. And granted, this is another one I'm a bit biased for, but this was the game that actually got me pretty, like, this was the first game I remember streaming a lot that got me a decent amount of, like, views, which obviously that's not something that people should focus on all the time, but the fact that, like, this was the first, like, game I got a lot of attention for whenever I did my live streams, that was pretty cool. And I've seen the entire span of how this game turned out. Like, there were definitely some rocky issues with the game at launch. Yes, for damn sure. But if anything, it only got better. And this wasn't even an instance where it's like, I personally had issues with the game at launch. Because, like, the one issue was definitely the fact that, like, if you chose your division, which was basically the replacement of the perks in this game, you can only use certain weapons as that class, or at least, like, the game encouraged you to only use certain weapons for that class. That, honestly, I didn't hate, because I'm someone who's more into class-based shooters anyways, like the old Battlefront games, or even like Battlefield. That's just something I've always been into anyway, so I never even had a problem with that back when this game launched. I know a lot of people fucking did though. But yeah, like, basically what I'm trying to say is that, like, this game is not that bad. It's not top 5 worst or even the worst Call of Duties ever. I don't understand why people can say that when literally Ghosts was made like 4 years prior. And Black Ops 4 was the game that came after this. And fucking Advanced Warfare was Sledgehammer's game before this. And they would eventually make Vanguard after this. If anything, this is Sledgehammer Games' best Call of Duty game. So, yeah. But suffice to say, unfortunately, as much as I would like to nominate it, unfortunately, not a lot of people would definitely give me a lot of, like, they would give me a look if I had this game on here and not their piece of shit corporate garbage on there, which unfortunately proves that, like, I hate this world. So what did I end up having the nominees for? Oh, by the way, PUBG 1, which again, as we've established, is aged extremely poorly, as we've established, and again, also proves the point that, like, I hate this world. So these are what I ended up nominating: For Honor, Halo Wars 2, Ghost Recon Wildlands, Divinity Original Sin 2, and Warhammer 2. A lot of sequels, admittedly. I'm not going to really repeat what I said about these games earlier, because you guys already know, but their multiplayer aspects can be pretty fun. Warhammer 2 campaign, really freaking awesome if you are also playing with another person. Ghost Recon Wildlands, amazing if you have cooperative play. And even just playing the normal PvP mode, it's a fun distraction. So, and of course, just cooperative in Original Sin 2 and Halo Wars 2, and even just fighting each other in Halo Wars 2. That's pretty awesome. But let's go over the real winner of the best multiplayer game of the year. The award for the best multiplayer game of 2017 goes to For Honor. A throwback to the earlier days of content I made on YouTube. If you know, you know. But yeah, For Honor. This might be weird because, again, wait, this is an Ubisoft game. This Ubisoft sucks. Yes, they suck. But as I mentioned earlier, Assassin's Creed Origins was admittedly kind of the last good game that they made. But truth be told, I would argue that this and Ghost Recon Wildlands were also some of the last bastions of good that the company had, which is kind of sad. That being said, For Honor, it's a very unique game, at least in comparison to many other games, as far as its, sort of, skill-based combat, and just sort of that very high skill ceiling, but a very rewarding, one at that. And this game also has a lot of like content that came out. Like there's tons of different upgrades, there's tons of different heroes to unlock. Like this game has it all. And even like, and granted, this obviously won't factor in too much, but even just the fact that like the game launched with even more heroes, which meant even more cosmetics that you can unlock in game without purchasing a dime. Granted, there are microtransactions, which is pretty stupid. I will wag my finger at Ubisoft at that. No. Bad Ubisoft. But thankfully, they've added in ways for you to be able to get, like, stuff faster so that, it's not as tedious of a grind, which is pretty awesome. And truth be told, yeah, as far as, like, this style, like, this setting of game, yeah, this is, in my opinion, the best non-RPG AAA, like, fantasy/medieval game. Like, I guess more medieval, because I use fantasy loosely, because, when people think of fantasy, they think of, like, anything that isn't just humans fighting each other. So it is technically a fantasy game, but it's a more grounded one. But you get the point. It's like, as far as like that style is concerned, yeah, no, I would argue that this is a genuinely really good game. One of the best, like I said, non-RPG fantasy games. Because typically fantasy games are just RPG games. Like this, along with Warhammer 2, really proved that you can actually make fantasy games that aren't just RPGs. So, but yeah, I would definitely recommend you guys check out For Honor. Like, and if you don't want to fight against players, there's always, you can always fight against bots, and it's still just, it's amazing to play. So, all right, now this is another category that they typically don't do, but we do. Best DLC expansion. So, what was the best content of this year? Well, truth be told, this was actually a really good year for DLCs and expansions. Because, if you guys also remember, I mentioned that this was the year that I started to do live streaming on YouTube initially. Well, 2 of the expansions that you see on, or DLCs that you see on the screen, were heavily responsible for that. Black Ops 3 Zombie Chronicles and Battlefield 1's In the Name of the Tsar. These 2 fucking expansion or DLCs, they mean a lot to me. Because, like, those 2 in particular. Because Black Ops 3, obviously, I'm a huge critic of Black Ops 3 outside of zombies. Zombies is amazing in that game. But the freaking multiplayer and campaign, no thanks. Like, don't even bother asking me to play Black Ops 3 multiplayer. I would just run straight from the hills for that. But as far as this was an amazing, thing for them to have done. A DLC released after the life cycle of a typical Call of Duty, especially one which remastered a ton of classic maps that we've seen throughout the years. Like, that's insane. Like, that's awesome. Granted, I will admit, in hindsight, a lot of the Chronicles versions, unfortunately, a lot of them aren't as good as the originals themselves, with the exception of Moon. Moon is way better in Black Ops 3 than it is on Black Ops 1. I will fight anyone on that. But as far as, like, I guess in hindsight, yeah, like, the maps, they look amazing. But the weapons, I don't know, it's just, admittedly, they aren't as good in my opinion as the Black Ops 1 or even just the World at War versions of a lot of these maps. Like, for example, like Verrückt plays way differently in BO3 than it does on BO1 or World at War, by the simple fact that it has the Wunderwaffe instead of the Winter's Howl like it did in BO1, and also the fact that you have Gobblegums and then you have the Wonderfizz machine. Basically making it to where the map is super goddamn easy. And same thing with Noct. Like, although, to be fair, like, with Shin and Uma, I'm not entirely against, because, like, granted, Shin and Uma is actually easier on World of War than it is on BO1 or BO3 because of how the zombies spawn. So, that's not necessarily, like, a knock against Shin and Uma, which also looked beautiful in BO3. Like, it looks super dingy in BO1 and World at War, but they made it super beautiful for whatever reason in BO3. But yeah, you get the point. Is I personally prefer the originals, but if you want an easier and more accessible version of a lot of these maps, Zombies Chronicles is the best way to play it. And it also helps that they updated like the BO3 store pages to where if you buy BO3, you automatically get Chronicles with it. So that's pretty awesome. And then, of course, there's the Battlefield 1 expansion, In the Name of the Tsar, which added basically a ton. Like, it basically added in 6 maps set in the the Russian fronts in World War One, with 2 maps that are set in the Russian Civil War. Granted, the Volga River one's not very good, but Zarzin, I think it's what it's called, which, by the way, for those who don't know, is basically what eventually would become Stalingrad in World War II. That map is phenomenal to play, and quite frankly, a lot of the other maps from this DLC are really fun to play as well. Oh, you saw me like stream the Estonia map, or like, I think it was last week, or like, the week, yeah, like last week. And I had a lot of fun on that. And truth be told, Battlefield 1, even if I don't ever stream the game ever again, I still have quite a bit of fun on it on occasion. And yeah, it's like maps like that, and just kind of, a setting like this that did really make a game that, admittedly, in hindsight, isn't as good as like some of the previous games in the series, make it even more special. And that's kind of why this game, like, I'm giving the nod to this expansion in particular. So, and then, of course, well, this is where XCOM 2's War of the Chosen is going to be. This makes way more sense to have this expansion here. This is another phenomenal expansion that I unfortunately didn't actually come around whenever this came out, because keep in mind, I had a very terrible computer when this game came out. Like, trust me, like, this was whenever this was whenever I had my first computer, but my first computer wasn't a gaming computer. So, yeah. That being said, this is a phenomenal continuation of an already really damn good game. And as I alluded to earlier, I do consider this to be another amazing, expansion to a game that is legendary. So go check out XCOM 2. And then last but not least, we have a City Skylines expansion here, because why not? Mass transit. It's pretty cool. It adds a ton of transportation options for your cities. And, you can have blimps, you can have more train railways, you can have more boats, more cars, more buses. Like, it might sound like it's small scale, and admittedly, it's not as impactful as like these 3 expansions, I feel like. But I will fully admit that mass transit, it has its place. It's not as like action packed as like these 3, but I still like it, and I still can respect it. That being said, it's more so neck and neck between these three, I feel like. You guys might be surprised by what I end up picking. So the award for the best expansion of 2017 goes to XCOM 2 War of the Chosen. Yeah. What? XCOM 2? But you loved playing Black Ops 3 back in the day. That was the first... Chronicles was the first thing you ever streamed. Or hell, even Battlefield 1. You were playing that last week. Yes. I owe a lot to both of those both of those DLC. But if we're going to be honest here, the objective answer is XCOM 2's War of the Chosen. This, again, keep in mind, I have not streamed XCOM. That's only, unfortunately, because my computer's a piece of shit whenever I try to run it on a stream. But as far as XCOM 2 is concerned, I actually really do love XCOM 2. I think it's actually one of my personal favorite games ever. I just wish I was able to stream it for you guys. But regardless of all that, though, this is a worthy addition to, like I said, already amazing game. And, well, just kind of continuing off the storyline that was established with XCOM 2, and just kind of like that sort of final push against, the invading forces, and also just kind of having more meaningful consequences to your characters. That to me is pretty cool. And, well, like I said, a lot of people do consider this to be one of the best expansions of all time. So this is proof that, like, you can have an expansion stand on their own without having to be solely reliant on the base game. Granted, I think you have to actually pay for the base game, but that's still worth it right there alone. So yeah, XCOM 2's expansion here, go check it out. It is worth all the money you spend on it. Trust me when I say that. Alright, remakes and remasters. I do think before we get into this, I'll be right back. I'm gonna get like a drink of water because admittedly my throat's kind of like hurting. So yeah, I'll be right back. Alright, I'm back. Okay, maybe not necessarily water, but, something at least. Alright, remakes, remasters. You all know them, you all may or may not love them. Admittedly, yeah, this wasn't actually that big of a year for remakes or remasters, or at least, any notable, hugely notable ones. There were some, ones that you can definitely point to, but I feel like a lot of the remakes or remasters from this particular year, they were kind of low key. There were a lot of games, they were more so just more for cult classic games, I feel like, as opposed to mega big games, with one particular exception, which, well, we'll talk about that one. Yep, you already see it. Crash Bandicoot's Insane Trilogy. I was actually admittedly kind of hesitant to put this guy on here because, well, truth be told, I'm not the biggest Crash Bandicoot fan. Again, that is very surprising for you guys because, again, I grew up on PlayStation. Crash was like the first PlayStation 1 mascot. Like, he was a PS1 mascot. And, you know, he was very synonymous with Spyro. But if I'm just going to be honest, I just don't find the gameplay of Crash to be all that interesting. Or at least, like, of his first initial outings. I just find it to be way too linear of a game for me to really, like, sink myself into all that much. I prefer the more, like, free and, like, roamable lands of Spyro way better. Which, of course, is why I like Sly Cooper, because Sly 1's level design is way more inspired by Spyro than it is Crash. I don't know why people say that Sly is more like Crash. He's not. But anyways, or at least as far as like gameplay, he's not like that at all. But anyways, as far as the Insane Trilogy is concerned, like, again, they are quality remakesters. It's kind of the same case with Spyro, if I'm going to be honest, where it's like they're technically remakes, but like they just remade the entire level design from, like, you know, scratch. So it's more of a remaster that was remade. It's confusing, but you get the point. It's the same case with this. But yeah, it's because of my hesitation of the fact that, like, I am not a big fan of the gameplay to begin with, as to why I'm barely nominating him. That being said, the rest of these, you can honestly just kind of pull out of a hat, and I'd be fine with nominating. Because, yeah, Fire Emblem Echoes is a remake of the second Fire Emblem game from 1992 that originally wasn't in, like, it was originally released only in Japan, so Western audiences weren't really knowledgeable of, you know, Fire Emblem Gaiden, so that's that. And then, yeah, Final Fantasy XII Zodiac Age was just a straight-up remaster of Final Fantasy XII, which was one of the Final Fantasy games I did play, and I like Final Fantasy XII. I acknowledge that, like, it's one of the lesser popular games in Final Fantasy, but I like the setting, like, and I like the sort of, you know, I like how this was the first game to introduce the real-time battles, because, yeah, that's what Final Fantasy XII did, is that it finally removed the turn-based stuff. Not that I hated turn-based, but, you know, having that fluidity and just real-time thing, I just think I personally prefer. So, and they got Metroid Samus Returns, remake of Metroid 2 on the Game Boy. Oh, The Return of Samus. That's why I was confused. I was like, why did I type that? But no, it's Metroid 2, The Return of Samus. That's what it's called. It's just they called it Samus Returns in the remake. It's a fine remake of an okay game from the early 90s. So yeah. And of course we got Yakuza Kiwami 2, which is a remake of the second Yakuza game from 2006. Kiwami 1 is, of course, also a remake of the first game from 2005. So, yeah, like, as far as these, if I'm going to be honest, like I said, these are more just kind of low-key remakes, most of these, or remasters. Like, they aren't really, like, reinventing the wheel or anything like that. And again, truth be told, like, I wouldn't really say that, like, these are, like, the most popular games in their respective franchises outside of Crash. So, but yeah, this, like I said, is a bit of a wild card, so, but I did ultimately end up choosing one. You may not necessarily agree with it, but that's fine. This is kind of a weird category anyway. Like, this is kind of a weird one to kind of nominate for to begin with, because, you know, this was just around the time when, like, video game remakes started to become popular. So it's like, I mean, remasters were up the ass, but like full remakes, yeah, they were still kind of a new thing, but whatever. So I guess the best remake / remaster award will go to Final Fantasy XII: The Zodiac Age. So this, again, you can honestly choose any of these on this list and I wouldn't disagree. I'm just choosing the one that I'm the most familiar with, but also the one that, like, I'm already kind of cool with to begin with. It also makes it way easier to pick it up, because keep in mind, this was a PlayStation 2 exclusive near the end of that console's life cycle. So having, you know, a more accessible version of Final Fantasy XII is always pretty nice to have. And of course, you know, it just does some quality of life improvement stuff, and, like, it just makes the game more stunning. Again, it's not reinventing the wheel. It's just a simple remaster of an already solid game from back in the day. So, but yeah, that's all I really got to say. Like, again, this one's kind of a weird one. That's kind of why this one's kind of short, and also because I want to make sure we're doing this faster. But yeah, that's the remakes. Yay, I guess. All right. Best art direction. So this is a category that the Game Awards typically does. And, well, they've always had mixed results. I feel like a lot of the time they focus more on the graphical fidelity rather than, like, the actual art direction and art style of said games. Did they finally change their tune on that, or no? Not really. I mean, yeah, Horizon Zero Dawn and Destiny 2. Okay. I don't know. It's kind of hard to justify games like this. Again, I'm more into games that have more realistic humans and just kind of a more realistic, like, look to them. But, like, I try to make sure I reserve this category for games that do try to go outside of the box of, like, that box. So it's kind of hard for me to, like, really, like, say that, like, they deserve it. And it also doesn't help that, like, I don't give a shit about either of those two games anymore anyways. So it's like, you know. And again, Persona 5 shouldn't even really count, because that's a game from 2016. So again, I know it was released in North America in 2017, but that still shouldn't count. So, and, well, as I've already said earlier, and it probably shouldn't surprise you, but Cuphead won this, which, again, respectable for what they did. It's just not my personal favorite art style. I just don't like that 30s, inherent 30s look. If you're gonna have stuff like that, I'd rather it be, like, stylized, like something like with My Life's Teenage Robot, where it's like it's inspired, but it has more inspiration than just the 30s. It has inspiration from the 90s, from the 60s, from a lot of anime. Like, I want it to have, like, a unique identity beyond it just being, like, very old Western animation from pre-World War II. So yeah, that's been the theme of this night, is World War II. Damn. So yeah, basically, Breath of the Wild is kind of the only acceptable choice I have here. But I'm about to give you guys some more options, which you're going to see some familiar faces again. Basically, games we've talked about plenty of times, so I'm not going to go over too much. It should be pretty obvious. I mean, just these covers alone should tell you everything you should know about the art direction for for all four of these games. But we can only choose one. And it basically comes down to personal preference anyways. So, the award for the best art direction of 2017 goes to Hollow Knight. So, if it wasn't Cuphead that was going to win, it was going to be Hollow Knight. I knew the instant that I saw this that, yeah, this is going to be the one that wins. And, you know, unlike something like Cuphead, Hollow Knight, unlike a lot of pretty much the other games we've talked about in this particular category, this one I can definitely confidently say that this is the first game that has a very unique, distinct style to it. Like, I can't think of any other game that looks like this. Like, I can tell, like, it was inspired by some, like, pseudo-gothic, maybe Cthulhu-esque, but even then, it has a lot of differences from it. Like, again, this game looks unlike anything else that I've seen before. Like, even games that, like, I know this game took inspiration from, like, Castlevania, or even shit like Limbo. Like, it doesn't look like them. Like, it's a very distinct look, which gives it identity, and that's what I really like about this game. And, well, I think I pretty much, well, like I said, obviously check out Saimori's playthrough of this, but maybe one day I'll end up streaming this game. Who knows? But, yeah, I don't know. It's just, as far as, like, this game's, like, look, just the mix of, like, yeah, those, like, black and, like, the black and white, but also with, like, a purple, like, a very deep purple tint to it, it looks really cool. And yeah, like, this is definitely the first game on this list I can confidently say it's something that, like, I have not seen prior to this. And I gotta give credit where credit is due with the art team for this. And as a bit of a bonus, soundtrack is pretty cool. Not necessarily like visual art, but I guess audio art, so it counts. So, alright. Best narrative. Best story in a game. What did the Game Awards think was the best story? It's complicated. I'd be repeating myself if I talk about Nier and Horizon. Have a good night. Hope you guys are fine. I rest my case. Have a good night. What Remains of Edith Finch, I already kind of alluded to, and Hellblade I've also kind of alluded to, but I kind of want to reserve for you guys. So, again, Edith Finch, as a reminder, because it has been, like, I think a couple of hours since we talked about this, Edith Finch is more interpersonal, but not, like, slice of life interpersonal. I think that's what I meant by, like, Night in the Woods and, like, Omori, is that, like, it's not really like a slice of life. It's just kind of more finding out, basically, kind of living up to kind of moving on from your past is kind of the best allegory I can make for Edith Finch. And they do it in a way that, like I said, is a very depressing, to say the least, thing. Like, it definitely makes you feel. So in that sense, I can agree. And, well, with Hellblade, of course, being set in a more fantastical, pseudo-historical setting, lends itself to a bit more of a, mythologically based, story. And yeah, it's just, again, it's also kind of a bit more of an emotional upbringing, despite the fact that, like, yeah, you're in, like, this sort of, like, fantastical setting, you can kind of relate to the characters. So, yeah, like, in that sense, I can see Hellblade being on here. And then we've got Wolfenstein 2: The New Colossus. Okay. I'll be the first one who will at least defend the gameplay of this game. I think the gameplay, yes, is it as good as, like, New Order or even Old Blood? No. But it can still be fun in its own right. And the fact that this game also kind of has a bit more of an open-ended, way in which you can actually handle scenarios, I think that's pretty good. It's just the story that's inconsistent. It has a very iffy story, to say the least. Like, okay, to put this in perspective, like, this game has way too much of a bit of, like, a tonal clash. Like, for example, whenever, BJ Blazkowicz is talking with, like, the crew and, kind of a lot of his, like, mental state and them kind of arguing, they would just throw in, like, some random joke in the middle, ruining and killing the tone of what was going on. And that's super consistent. It's like it tries to make light of the situation, which that's fine, but they do it so much that it just kind of it just kind of kills the tension, like it does it so many times where it's not really that engaging. And that sucks because, again, it's like I like the game, it's just not as good as New Order, because New Order almost made me cry. It did not make me cry. It almost did, though. But yeah, like, that sucks. As far as the winner goes, Edith Finch won, which, fair. But what did I end up choosing as the nominees? So it should not surprise you. It's all games we talked about before. Edith Finch, Hellblade, Resident Evil 7. I said Village there. It should be Biohazard. God damn it. But yeah, like, fair, because Resident Evil 7, you're following a new character and just kind of trying to survive and seeing if he can save his girlfriend. Like, it's really fucking sad. I'm not gonna lie. Like, Jesus Christ. If anything, like, this game also almost made me cry. It did not, but it... Damn. Like, that hit. And you guys know exactly what part I'm talking about, too. So... ouch. And... admittedly, these last two picks were just kind of more throw-ins. Pyre, mostly just because of just kind of the linearity of its world building over time. I don't know if that necessarily counted. And then Uncharted Lost Legacy. Story is admittedly, like, okay. But, like, I wouldn't necessarily say this was, like, top tier story. Especially in Uncharted. So it's like, should I really nominate this? Again, I can update this whenever I do, because admittedly, 2017, again, was just another year where it's like, it was fine when it comes to, like, narrative, but I don't know if there was enough. However, this is one of the 3 categories that I know we have to have. So, it is what it is. But, obviously, I ended up choosing one, like always. So here we go. So the award for the best narrative goes to What Remains of Edith Finch. If it wasn't winning best indie game, it was gonna win best narrative. Because, again, this is another just sort of like dark, depressing, but deep and meaningful story at the same time. And like I said, it's not a long game. It's only about like an hour or 2, but it uses its time perfectly. Like, again, that's the length of, like, that's like the normal length of like a movie, right? I kind of like to think of it more as an interactive movie as opposed to, that. So yeah, like, suffice to say, like, if you want something that's a bit more grounded but isn't necessarily a slice of life, there's your go-to. All right. We've reached the game of the year. The best game to represent 2017. What did the Game Awards think as far as, like, this category? Well, yeah. It should not surprise you that 3 of these picks are, well,
It's not good.
yeah. Again, Persona 5, I heard amazing things about that game, but again, it is a game from 2016. Need I say more? Horizon Zero Dawn, again, even if the gameplay you like, the story is presented in a way that is super goddamn bland, it is actually kind of painful. Thank you, have a good night. PUBG, a game that literally died, like, months after even whenever they did the Game Awards. And just frankly, like I said, wasn't really all that good to begin with. It was extremely buggy at launch. And, well, it being a battle royale, well, thank you, have a good night. Zelda, I feel like is the only true one to kind of be the winner. Mario Odyssey, again, I am willing to have that on the action adventure. It is not game of the year, though. I just feel like, again, it's just a bit too samey in comparison to other Mario games for me to really be like, is this the best game? So it's like, it would be the second best out of the ones that they nominated, but I still think Zelda's the objectively better game. So, which I thankfully have good news. Thank God they actually got it right for once. They did the anti-Hoodyitis here. Like, they actually got the best choice out of all these, which is good. But let's see if we can improve on this list. Thankfully, we can. And you know what? We're going to actually have 6 nominees. It should be pretty obvious that a lot of these games are here. Resident Evil 7 Biohazard, Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, Prey, Divinity Original Sin 2, Total War Warhammer 2, and Assassin's Creed Origins. I know people are still iffy about that last one, but again, I am assuring you, it is a good game. And I think it's worthy to be with these other games, which I also think are really damn good games. So, as far as I'm concerned, these, in my opinion, is probably what the Game of the Years should have been. You know, Resident Evil 7 for not only, bringing Resident Evil back to the map, like back on the map, but also being one of the best survival horror games in an era where, frankly, survival horror games were doing kind of shit, if I'm just going to be honest, with some notable exceptions like Darkwood. So it's like, to have a AAA game be like this, that's pretty awesome. Prey, another amazing example of a game that admittedly was a bit of a sleeper hit, but was able to stand on its own. Like, if you want an amazing, sandbox, quasi open world first person shooter, go check out Prey. I cannot express how much you have to play it. Divinity Original Sin 2, an amazing showcase that old school RPGs can still work. You don't have to do a Bethesda with everything. You can pretty much, take inspiration from old school, RPGs and just run with it. You don't have to, even, obviously have, modern amenities, but still make it a worthwhile experience. Total War Warhammer 2. Obviously, I'm biased with this one because, again, this was the game that got me into Warhammer. But more importantly, this was the game that kind of brought Total War back into a bit more of a respectable, repertoire for at least a little bit. And being able to heavily improve on the faults that were in the first Warhammer was pretty awesome to see. And, well, being a big part of the channel. And well, Assassin's Creed Origins, as I've already mentioned, yeah, it may have been one of the last big, it may have been one of the last good Ubisoft games, but it has an amazing detailed world of ancient Egypt during the last few years of it before it's fully under Roman control, as well as its deep progression and rewarding stuff as far as its RPG mechanics. Sorry, I didn't know how to word that. And one thing I was kind of loosely kind of talking about, but Bayek being a pretty relatable character. Maybe not necessarily as cool as Ezio, but still really damn cool in his own right. And for being one of the first, basically being one of the first to form the Assassin's Order. The Assassin's Brotherhood. Excuse me, not Order, because that's the Templars. Trust me, I know my Assassin's Creed lore. I played the first games up until Black Flag. I know everything. But in all seriousness, though, I would argue that this is a good game. So, but rest assured, all good things have to come to an end. We got to choose the game of the year for 2017. So, the award of the best game of 2017 goes to The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild. It was admittedly actually pretty close, because the weapon degradation in this game is unfortunately kind of the biggest crutch with this game, in my opinion. It honestly was pretty close between this and Resident Evil 7, and even Warhammer 2. But I ultimately do think that the Game Awards actually did get this right. This is the best game to represent 2017. And, well, here's something that I have not mentioned with this. It actually kind of helped Nintendo kind of get back on their feet again, because, they may have saw short-term success with the Wii, but after a while, the Wii kind of started to lose favor for a lot of people, because a lot of people, including myself, just started seeing it as a gimmick console. And the disaster that was the Wii U pretty much put Nintendo in dire straits, similar to what they were like during their GameCube era, during the GameCube days. So, yeah, let's just say this was not that was I'd say around 2009-ish to about 2017 was not a good era for Nintendo. So, this was a good thing for them. And, well, it's a solid entry into an already legendary IP. And, well, even to this day, people still debate if this is the best Zelda game of all time. Obviously, I'm not particularly, comfortable to join in that conversation quite yet, because I still have a lot of Zelda games I got to play myself. But rest assured, I can definitely see where the appeal comes from. And, well, I think this is the best choice as far as best game to represent, game of the year for 2017. So, here we go. Let's recap. Best indie game, Hollow Knight. Best game by a new studio, Pyre. Best action adventure, Zelda Breath of the Wild. Best RPG, Divinity Original Sin 2. Best shooter, Prey 2017. Best sim strategy, Total War Warhammer 2. Best multiplayer, For Honor. Best DLC/expansion, XCOM War of the Chosen. Best remake/remaster, Final Fantasy 12 Zodiac Age. Best art direction, Hollow Knight. Best narrative, What Remains of Edith Finch. And of course, game of the year, The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. So, as far as my personal top 10 favorites of the year, keep in mind, this is in no particular order. Here you go. So, yeah, Resident Evil 7, Zelda, Prey, Warhammer, Origins, Sniper Elite 4, Ghost Recon Wildlands, For Honor, Neo, which I know I didn't really talk about that too much. I think Neo's pretty cool. I didn't know if I wanted to nominate it for Game of the Year though, so that's why I didn't nominate. Like, I didn't nominate it because like it's cool, but it's like the sequel improved on it. So, and then of course, Hollow Knight. But fret not. Let's also give honorable shout outs to games that don't qualify, but admittedly I still kind of like myself. You guys can make fun of me all you want, but you guys are wrong. So here you guys go. Dave Infamy, another World War II game, along with Call of Duty World War II. Again, this was the year of the return of World War II games for sure. So there's that. Also, I know people shit on Outlast, and yes, the ending is terrible in that game. Don't get me wrong, but Outlast 2 is still kind of cool. Like, the, rural Colorado cult setting is pretty cool. I mean, it's way better than the fucking Far Cry 5's cult any day of the fucking week, so I'll take this over that. The Surge, I mentioned The Surge 2 in the 2019 list, it being a more sci-fi based Dark Souls sort of game. It has its place. And then, yeah, Ultimate Epic Battle Simulator. Again, a game that, like, it's more of a joke game than anything else, but it can still be fun to mess around with. And then, of course, like I said, Wolfenstein New Colossus. Again, it's not a bad game. I like the game. It's just, it has a very weak narrative. And I think that's why people didn't care about it as much. News outlets fucking loved New Colossus, though. Like, wow. And then, of course, well, last but not least, 2017's Battlefront 2 post-launch. Like, how it is now, yes, it is better than it was when it first came out, but again, that loot box issue that this game had that caused worldwide controversy alone makes me not want to nominate this. That, and also the campaign sucks. I'm just gonna be straight up. The campaign's terrible. And even though this game is better than it was at launch, old Battlefront 2 is still objectively better. I rest my case. Have a good night. Except this time legitimately, because we've reached the end. So I hope you guys did enjoy this. As always, if you guys did, make sure to hit that follow button down below and turn on the bell icon so that you'll be notified exactly when I'll be streaming. I'll see if I can get the 2016 list, or not list, but the podcast hopefully done relatively soon. So I'm really excited about that list because 2016 actually was a pretty decent year for certain categories. So I'm definitely excited to talk about that year. And like I said, if you guys haven't, check out the links down below to support me, specifically Discord, SoundCloud, YouTube, all that fun stuff. And if you guys haven't already, you can also hit that subscribe button. If you can't necessarily do that, that's completely fine. I'm just glad that you guys took time to watch this. But regardless of all that, though, make sure to share the stream to other people as well and continue to be awesome people in the process. But until then, I'll see you guys on the next one. Have a good night, guys.